PokeClass is sponsored by Collector's Cash, your number one vendor for this year's US Nationals. As well as having an online store full of singles, boxes, accessories, and cards from other trading card games, Collector's Cash will be at US Nationals buying your bulk cards and selling all you're going to need for this weekend. If you're going to Nationals, then make sure you visit them, and you can also check them out at www.collectorscash.com. Welcome to PokeClass episode 32. This week has been fairly nice for news this week, getting us all excited about the new set and even ones further in the future. US Nats is on the horizon and Canadian Nationals is probably going to be in full swing by the time you watch this, so I'm going to continue with some last minute information to make sure you get the most out of your weekend. First though, let's get to the news. PokeBeach.com has yet again provided us with some great information about our next set, Emerging Powers. These new scans have been released and has given us some information that two of the most hyped cards from the set will be released, Beartic and Pokemon Catcher. Beartic is set to lock you down by not letting you attack next turn and is said to be best paired with Vileplume to prevent the use of Switch to negate the effect. Along with this, it's also a stage 1 with a massive 130 HP and a really nice weakness against Steel, a type that really isn't set to see much play with all the fire around at the moment. Pokemon Catcher must be a card that you've heard about, and if not, now's the time to get prepared. This card is exactly the same as Gust of Wind all the way back in base set, and is set to make a huge dent in the metagame as we know it right now. Being able to bring up whatever you want with no catch whatsoever is pretty crazy. This means that stage 2 setup decks such as Magnabore are destined to struggle. People will run this card and will run it in high numbers, but we're yet to find out what kind of impact it's going to have on the game, but come August, I'm sure we'll find out. As well as all this, we've had confirmation about the Archeops card I was talking about last episode, and it does indeed have the same ability as Aerodactyl had in base set. Along with this, we now have a fairly good idea about how the new fossil mechanic is going to work, and it doesn't really look that good to be honest. This scan of the other fossil set to be released, Cover Fossil, is a trainer, but you play it as a normal trainer rather than benching it like before. It then has the effect to look at the bottom 7 cards of your deck, and if you find a Tortuga, you can then place it onto your bench. This to me has weakened the concept of fossils a fair bit, and they don't really see much play last format because of the high presence of trainer luck. This format, they could have seen some interesting play, and the full evolution of it, Caracosta, isn't actually that bad. This shows us that Archeops may not see the play that most people thought in the first place, but we'll have to see how this fossil is going to work. So that's it for all the news this week, so it's on to the main part of the episode. This week I've decided to go over an issue that I'm finding with the new format, and that's the limited amount of recovery we have available. I'm going to go through all the options we have for recovering Pokemon, energy, and even taking a quick look at cards that help us get back into the game after suffering a pretty damaging blow. First, let's have a look at the forms of recovery we have at the moment, and I'm going to start off with one of the most obvious cards of choice. Flower Shop Lady is a supporter that allows you to take 3 Pokemon and 3 basic energy from the discard pile, and then shuffle them back into your deck. This card really isn't that bad, but it really isn't amazing either compared to what we had before rotation. Being able to grab those long lost Pokemon from the discard is great, but shuffling them into the deck isn't so. This means that you should really have a way to search out that Pokemon you've just put into there to get the most out of this card, and I've recently found that this doesn't happen too often. If you're needing to use this card, a lot of your resources have already been spent, making it even more difficult to search that much needed Pokemon back out again. I'm also finding 3 Pokemon to be a very strange number to work with. In stage 2 decks it allows you to pull a full evolution line back into the deck, but for those of you running stage 1s, that extra Pokemon just end up being a dead card simply because you won't be able to recover the other Pokemon to go with it. With the ruling being that if you have 3 Pokemon in the discard, you must take that amount, it's not like you can just choose to leave one in there that you know isn't going to be of use. I know this won't be the case in some situations, but I am finding this to be a slight issue myself, but maybe I'm just being a little bit picky. Those points being made though, this card is one of the most solid forms of recovery we have, even if it does take up your supporter for the turn. This has been considered a staple in most decks just to have that option of recovery in there, but I'd try most decks without it first to see if you actually find yourself needing it. Next up is Revive, a trainer that has maybe slipped below the radar slightly. Before this card came out, it was slightly hyped for Gyarados as a form of recovering those Magikarps to keep up with a swift recovery, but since Gyarados really hasn't seen black and white, it was kind of forgotten as a concept. Revive allows you to simply take a basic Pokemon from your discard pile and place it straight onto the bench. This instantly reminds me of Pokemon Rescue, and I can't seem to bring up the card without thinking about this one, which could be the reason why people aren't playing it. To me, it seems like an inferior version of Rescue, since you can only grab basic Pokemon and it goes straight onto the bench rather than into your hand. Now that does seem bad at first, but Pokemon Rescue isn't around anymore, so this is the best we've got. And without considering Pokemon Rescue, it isn't actually that bad. Where Revive comes into its own is when we're dealing with both Reshiram and Zekrom, two decks that are set to see some decent play when it comes to Nationals. KOing any of these two can be hard enough, but when it bounces straight back to the bench during the next turn, it can be even harder to get past. If you're playing Zekrom or Reshiram yourself, I would definitely test this card out, even if you only run a single copy of it. It gets you some really nice recovery that doesn't need to rely on recovering other stages and can get you back into a game that you could otherwise struggle with. I would say it works a little better with Reshiram, simply because Reshiram's easier to set up in a single turn right after a KO, but it can work with Zekrom if you have the means to power it up. Energy Retrieval is up next and provides us with the best recovery of energy at the moment. This trainer allows you to put 2 basic energy from your discard pile and into your hand. This card is obviously great in decks featuring Emboar, since it can get you the energy back that you lose suffering a KO or what you burn off by using an attack. Using it in conjunction with attackers such as Reshiram and Rayquaza Deoxys Legend means that you can grab the energy back that you've discarded the previous turn, and then use other means to power them straight back up again. Overall, this card is extremely good and very versatile. If your main attacker requires 2 or more energy for its attack, you should consider running this. Losing those energy to the discard pile when your attacker gets KO'd will be sweetened by being able to get the energy straight back with this card, even if you don't have a way to attach it straight away. Test it out in your builds and see how it goes. On the subject of energy, we do have Energy Returner, but I'm not going to spend long on it because Energy Retrieval outclasses it in every way. This card allows you to choose 4 basic energy from your discard pile and shuffle them back into your deck. This sounds okay, but with Energy Retrieval out at the same time, there's really no excuse to use this card. Being able to put 2 energy straight back into the hand is always going to be better, so there's no real reason to use this card that I can think of. That being said, it's still a form of recovery we have available. Junkam is one of my favourite forms of recovery right now, and is one of the best we've got. This card allows you to get rid of cards you don't need, such as starter Pokemon or tech cards that aren't relevant to the matchup, and then pluck a trainer from the discard to use again. This is perfect for reusing cards such as Rare Candy, Switch, and Energy Retrieval to keep your deck running as smoothly as possible, even when things hit the discard. This is definitely something you should try out in the future if you haven't already, and try slotting it into your builds that don't have it to try it out. It's a great asset to decks at the moment, and is one you shouldn't be missing out on. Jirachi from Unleashed and Call of Legends has a rather interesting form of recovery for decks based around psychic Pokemon. If you saw my recent article on 6 prizes, I mentioned it in a fair bit of detail on there, and I'll post a link to it in the description so you can check it out. Jirachi's Poker Power, Stardust Song, allows you to flip 3 coins, and for each head you may attach a psychic energy from the discard pile and onto Jirachi. This is actually a really nice way to recover energy from the discard pile if you're running a deck like Loscar, Mugar, or even Vileplume Mismagius. Running this in conjunction with Shaman allows you to have the option to move energy around and onto your main attacker. However, Jirachi himself can also function as a pretty useful attacker. With so many decks reliant on Rare Candy now, using Time Hollow to return the higher stages to the opponent's hand can put them in a challenging position. This means that they either have to recover the Rare Candy they've already used, or try to find another one from the deck to get back to where they were. This strategy actually works nicely with Vileplume to block their Rare Candy, but it also works well just as a form of slowing the opponent down. If you're planning on running a psychic based deck, then try at least one of these out in your build, and I'm sure you'll be pleased with the results. Up next is an up-and-coming Pokemon that has slightly slipped below the radar and can actually be part of a very effective deck, and it's Typhlosion Prime. This Pokemon uses its power Afterburner to get a fire energy from the discard pile and attach them to any of your Pokemon, in exchange for a single damage counter. Even though Typhlosion is a stage 2 Pokemon, this card can work really well in Reshiram. Being able to recover those energy and attach them quickly is a very important aspect of the deck, and Typhlosion really doesn't take too long to set up. Pair this with Ninetales and you have a good deck on your hands by being able to draw cards with retrieval and then recover the energy with Typhlosion. This is obviously only subjective to fire decks, but put into the right one, it can be a really effective engine, one to look out for Nationals. Next we have Fisherman, a card that is a more powerful version of energy retrieval, but in the form of a supporter. This is another card that lets you get energy from the discard pile and put them straight back into your hand, but it gets you 4 instead of the 2 that energy retrieval lets you get. This is a very nice card to have in anything with Emboar, allowing you to recover that energy in a nice amount and then attach them back onto your Pokemon in the same turn. I wouldn't run more than 2 of these in any deck, seeing as it takes up your supporter for the turn, and there isn't a lot of opportunity to make full use of getting 4 energy from the discard pile when you have energy retrieval there as well. One to consider if you're running Emboar, and it could make an appearance in some decks this year. Twins is the last card on the list, and is kind of a form of recovery, but in the sense that it recovers you in the game, rather than netting you resources from the discard pile. If you're falling behind in prizes during the game, you can play this card to get 2 cards from your deck to help you mount a comeback. This card was very nice last format, since there was a better search of single supporters, but this format is seeing a little less play simply because cards such as Pont and Juniper are becoming more useful. This card still has its place in decks and can net you a key rare candy and stage 2 to get yourself back into a game that you're starting to fall behind in. If you're running Lost Scar, you will need to run multiple copies of this, but anything else should only really run the one. You'll be able to use it every now and then, but you don't want to be drawing into it too often that it's just a dead card. It probably won't fit in fast stage 1 decks because you plan to be ahead in prizes, but slower stage 2 base decks could benefit from this card. So that's pretty much all the recovery we have in this format, and with only a week to go till Nationals, these are the final few cards you should be choosing for your list. As for Nationals advice in general, make sure your deck is extremely consistent, because you're going to be playing a good 8 or 9 rounds of Swiss alone, so making sure your deck works as it should for each game is essential. Also make sure your deck can stand up to the big guns, that are Magnezone Emboar, Donphan variants, Reshiram and Zekrom. These are all going to be potential threats at the weekend, and if your deck can't stand up to these, you'll end up having a rough day. Make sure you test all of these matchups to make sure you have them practiced enough to give you the best chance of doing well. Other than that, just make sure you're playing a deck that you know well and are confident playing. Even if you feel another deck has better matchups across the board, the deck you've been playing with and testing the most will give you better results. Just play with what you're most comfortable with, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed. Next week, US Nationals will be in full swing, so I'll give you a last minute rundown of how Canadian Nationals went so you can brush up on what to expect while you're there. For those of you going to Nationals, I wish you the best of luck and I'm eager to find out the results. Thanks for watching, make sure you subscribe and check back next week for the next episode of PokeClass.